organization in the discipline and the disciplines that are reflected here, because the word of mouth will get out that from the industry members, from the government members, the value is being derived. And it takes a number of years, but eventually people will start coming to you. And again, that's the key, and that all is based on the value that they derive. So where you sit now in this process is you have gone through now a process at the last meeting, right, when Babu was here to select your initial set of projects. So you had basically your new proposal set, you had some cultivation process from your planning meeting. You went through the life form, the level of interest, feedback, evaluation. Again, key thing within the center. We'll talk about that more in a bit. You've reviewed, you've discussed, you've adapted those projects, you've done a selection, and in fact, you went ahead and you moved now through about a 6-month period through which there was IAB engagement. Again, initially, when you're first starting out a center, it's tough to do that initially because the communication framework is not there, members are still coming on, okay? There's some flux in this project set even initially through this first 6 months, okay? But now we're up at this second meeting, okay, this fall meeting for you. We're gonna go through this process again, we're gonna get feedback, and the key thing here is you're going to refine those projects based on those feedbacks. Hopefully we'll get a lot of interest in the projects as well as interest with change. In other words, can you do this? Can you do this slightly differently? Okay? That's going to refine them. And again, what this all does by the completion of the project is it really tightly binds, especially as we run through this process multiple times, people get more used to what it does and how you can make use of it. Tightly binds the member needs to the capabilities of the university's law. Okay, this process is essential to really deriving value. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention along these lines is you guys went through, and actually Dee is going to work through a set of life processes, okay? Level of interest and feedback evaluation, okay? Going through this cycle, we're now through the review cycle. What I decided to do is create a new slide here that just talks a little bit about this process and gives you a sense of how this works, okay? Especially as you're starting a center, and this is not unique to you, but this happens to every center. Again, the centers I love to go through the most are planning grants, okay, as well as first IAB, second IAB meetings, because things are really formative, okay? They're just gelling. And so it is very important to kind of understand and see the dynamic. And it's very important that the leadership of the center, as well as the IAB, knows how to, can get a sense and start reading the figures that they're getting with respect to the life process and also, obviously what they're hearing in the meetings. The key thing as you move forward is you can maximize this value if the evaluation, IAB engagement are in place. Remember that cycle, they're connected to the projects. Not only, yes, a single company, but a group of companies with a shared interest. And also, the thing that's blocked out up here on the slide with the video image is center operations that are grounded in really sound project management. It's basic project management, all right? With great reporting, boiled down to what's the value, what are the impediments, how are we going to get around them, and so on. So those webinars that you might have between meetings, on a monthly or whatever basis you decide, okay, stress those, stress the value that you can get out. The IAB can really help to structure those. So if things are going right, what might you see from the life evaluation if you go through, let's say, the first 3 or 4 meetings of a center? So what I've shown here is, again, the level of interest and feedback evaluation. For those of you who are new, Dee's going to talk more about this, okay? But what you will see is you will see a form online, and you'll see there's paper forms actually in the back of your book if you've never seen one of these before, okay? So if you're an IAB member, if you go to the back of the book, you'll see there's a tick off for very interested with change, okay? And then it's abstain or not interested and abstain. Okay? So what I'm showing here is, let's say it's a brand new center, you've gone through your planning grant, you have your first IAB meeting, you select 5 projects, all right? You've had the discussion about those. Here they're shown here. And so they're awarded. And you look back at the life forum, and what you see is all right, what I'm showing here with the slash, with the green numbers, is the number of members very interested or interested. And then on the other side of the slash are interested with change. Okay? And again, as Dee will tell you, the interested with change are really most valuable. But what you see here is, okay, let's say there's maybe 6 or 8 members at this center, all right? You're really seeing someone, a situation which is very common in centers where members are interested in their particular project, okay? Because that's really kind of what brought them into the center. And, that's perfectly understandable, all right? And there's not a lot of interest across, all right? If we had, these numbers could potentially have, if there were 8 members, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, all of them. Everyone could say they're very interested in every last project, okay, on this. But what you're seeing here is people are cautiously saying, yes, I'm really interested in only my project. With a couple of them, all right, are saying, okay, maybe I'm interested in this one with some changes, all right? So now we go through to the fall meeting, okay? And this is key. You're tired of me saying this already, I'm sure. And that is what happens between the meetings is absolutely essential, both on the faculty side and on the IAB side. It's critically important that the faculty really look and review the life forms, okay? They understand, talk to the IAB members if they were interested with change, so that they can say, okay, that's within scope, I can adapt this project, I can achieve that, all right? It's critical that the IAB get involved in this process through these meetings between these twice yearly meetings, between the updates, okay? And again, you can do that by virtue of having assigned mentors to projects and so on. Okay? When you do that, when you come back for the next meeting, so again, this was the first meeting, here's the second meeting. Again, ideally you're going to see a shift. You're going to start to see a shift in these numbers. You're going to see more who are very interested or interested, as indicated by the number on the right, with these double numbers. And again, you're seeing some of the added interest in projects. And ultimately, what do? We go through this cycle again, coming to the year conclusion with more feedback, okay, from that meeting. And by the project's conclusion, this is assuming a 1-year project, okay, you're seeing some strong numbers in terms of, I'm either interested or very interested in the outcomes from this. That doesn't mean you've been waiting as an IAB member till the very end to get your outcomes. You've been getting your outcomes all along. You've been interacting and pulling results from those and using those results. Okay? That's part of the reason now you say that you're interested and very interested. Okay, so seeing this migration of numbers would be a wonderful thing. Okay, and it's very typical of a center as you're starting to grow and emerge. The final portion of this is, and this is going to be where you guys are going to be at the next meeting. Remember I said the selection of new projects is going to be very important. How you're going to do that, the IAB needs to talk about with the center directors this afternoon. All right, but you may have a roadmap by then to help to, or at least some rough one to do that. If you don't, you still have a lot of information, right? So what do you have? You have 1 year, well, you basically have 2 cycles of the life process. You have extensive discussions with the IAB, both between meetings and at meetings, all right? You know really what things, as you went through this process, were starting to resonate, where there were shared interests across the IAB that they've either directly stated, all right, to you, and come to that conclusion and said, this is where we want projects, or alternatively, you gleaned by virtue of the discussions. And then when you start with that first project set, you've gone ahead, they've decided what it's going to be. If you were to look at those life forms after the fact, you might typically see, again, now versus this situation, you see based on the better direction of these projects to areas where you know there's shared need and there's interest on the part of the IAB, a beginning position where there's really a more uniform interest across the membership. So again, effectively using all of the time, all of the interaction, both in the meetings, between meetings, and the tools that we have, such as the life process, to be able to really evoke discussion and decide what those areas are where we can talk about having pre-competitive research that's going to be of shared value across the membership is really key in deriving value. I've noted on the side here, this is again another evaluation result across all centers across the country, those 61 centers. If you look across all centers, it's between 40 and, an average member of a center will be interested between 40 and 50% of they'll either be interested or very interested, to click off on the light, in 40 to 50% of the projects within their center. Okay? There are some centers which are much higher than that. Okay? There are some centers which are lower than that. Right? So again, it's a key metric that you'll look at, that the IAB will look at, should be looking at, D will be looking at, the center leadership will be looking at to see how can we maximize that. And again, that will be key to the success of the center. Finally, last slide was a lot of talk about ERCs and IUCRCs. I don't have STCs on here, okay? But especially in Illinois, you guys have a lot of major centers, okay? And that's why, again, this center has a great opportunity to tap into these centers, okay? Tap into that capability. So this can really be the interface for that. So we have a slide that I pulled out and I added to the deck. This is not in yours, but I did it last night after the reception discussion, to just look at two cases, an ERC, and this kind of goes for an STC too, versus what an IUCRC is. And this is helpful also to the industry folks who might be involved in some of, let's say, the ERCs or STCs too. So in the case of an ERC, right, these are, again, two complementary programs, but different. So in the case of an ERC, right, there's a solicitation and in some cases an RFP in defined areas. For example, there was just one with looking at some nano areas, okay? But if you look at the funding sources, right, NSF dollars are dominant in this scenario. So this is just a representative pie chart where the NSF dollars are really there to, again, correctly so, be able to really forward research agenda of that center which has been proposed by the university or universities involved. Again, there's some perhaps university contribution, and then there's industry dollars, okay, that might be associated with that, if not initially, afterwards. If you look at an IUCRC, again, I already mentioned, we don't say what areas. It really depends on the organizations involved and the needs of the sectors and the universities. The funding makeup is significantly different. And again, this really reflects back to, remember that chart I showed you with the funding of the program since its inception. Okay, the industry and agency dollars that are members really drive this. The university is much larger because they're giving that overhead contribution. Okay, and NSF is the smallest dollar contribution in this environment because the people who are running this are really this based on our best practices and framework. The other thing is, in terms of operation of the center, okay, we have a research and education program in an ERC that follows the proposed plan, all right? And really, an industry signs up to this research direction. Okay? And agreements can vary across across different ERCs. Here, within this center and in other IUCRCs, the other 60 IUCRCs, right, the research is cooperatively defined and it's sector relevant. Based on the IAB interactions and all the things that we've talked about. And so the industry and the center shape the research direction and plan. Yes, when Brian submitted the proposal, there was a research plan, but that will be modulated and adapted based on the IAB and the feedback, the life process, where you're going as a direction, because ultimately he's going to be recruiting members to this. And again, they're only going to come as members based on the value that they derive and the effectiveness of that plan in providing that value. And again, there's that universal kind of uniform cooperative agreement that we talked about that all members sign. We can adapt, and again, as we talked about, your single university, you can become multi-university in time based on needs and shared value. Okay. Again, from the ERC perspective or STC, they tend to be as defined and then proceed. So I wanted to show this just to give you a, see how these two are complementary in terms of how they're organized, how they're funded, and really how the research agenda is driven by the organizations. So you get a feel, again, this just echoes, whether it be the evaluation, whether it be the funding model, the key role of the industry sectors in really defining the direction of an IECRC. So with that concludes my presentation. My contact information is there, Baboos, which I believe you already have, and others. And again, Alex, the founder of the program, is still with the program as a consultant as well. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to ask them now or answer them now. And also, he and I will both be here for the duration today. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to address.
Larry?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, of the 61, the fact that, there's, the industry interest here is pretty broad. Are the other centers like that too, or are they more cohesive after a particular industry sector?
Great question. There are both, okay? There are ones which are very, very targeted, okay? And there are ones which have multiple areas, okay? So it is more challenging when you have multiple areas. There's no question about that. And so the key there is, and this now goes back to the discussion that we may want to engage in this afternoon, is as you start looking at really operating cooperative, and again, that's my strongest message to you, and that is, I know from an industry perspective, the hardest kind of pill to swallow in some cases, okay? But operating in that mode will ultimately give you the most value. What many centers will do, and I'm not sure they probably did standard voting last time, okay? What the IAB can make a decision about as they move forward and feel more comfortable is they can say, you know what, it's important that we have projects in these particular areas. So they'll go through the voting of the selection of projects, and they'll engage in discussion of, okay, we want to make sure we have so much of our portfolio in this area, or this area, okay? And so, whereas a center, as you described, it's a single focus, really, you don't have to go there. I'm just trying to think, actually, even in my own center, we had this issue, which was single focus. Our planning and our first meeting, we were providing proposals all over the place. And actually, our IAB really cut us back to a very central focus. But what happened is, as you know, every area's got sub-areas. And so we started now having that conversation just about sub-areas within that area. So, and it really was driven by what the IAB wanted to do. Okay? So this is why, industry folks are key in this, because you have that perspective. And so that discussion needs to be entered probably this afternoon as to how you want to manage that. And do you want to, I just got back from another meeting, actually I'll name the name, it's Center for Metamaterials, okay? CUNY and UNC Charlotte, okay, are in that. And in fact, they're trying to obtain focus. As a matter of fact, their members are saying, you need to focus. You can have multiple areas, and again, I use them as an example, but many centers go through this. And so what they're saying is, well, we want to recruit in these other areas, but okay, the IAB decided we're going to take this one area, okay, and yeah, our portfolio, if you did the distribution across these three areas, it has the peak of the distribution, and it has smaller projects or less projects in these other areas. And the reason they wanted to maintain those other projects, they wanted to use those as recruiting tools, okay, to go out, and the IAB helped them to locate some companies. So that's one strategy, and, how you deal with that. Okay, all right, thank you. Again, be happy to answer any questions